I now move on to the third, which is towards a long-term programme to address challenges, opportunities and the potential of the treaty. And I am delighted to give the floor to Dr. Rikke Olivera, a senior technical specialist, natural resource management policy and technical advisory division of IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development.
Thank you very much and good afternoon. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak on behalf of IFAD and this event from the Secretariat's part. I will give a short presentation of what we are doing, and more on base of that, in the end talk a little bit about what are the challenges but also the opportunities we see. So IFAD, our mandate is to support the smallholders farmers around the world in accessing knowledge, services and other assets to overcome poverty. And we work through governments and other partners. For the Sustainable Development Goals, if you invest in agricultural growth, then you would be twice as efficient in reducing poverty than if you invest in any other sector. So that's a key point for us when we start. 2.5 billion people drive their livelihoods and their income from small farms, agriculture. Most of them are poor and half of them are undernourished. So this is our target group. So with that said, it's clear to reaching those 5 of the Sustainable Development Goals that is closest to our work, we need to work with smallholders' access to assets and to resources. And one of them is the plant genetic resources for food and agriculture. So our priorities in our current strategic framework, but they go further back. On the top you have that one of the things we are trying very hard to do is getting indigenous peoples effective involved and their participation in development. They are often marginalized, so we try to pull them in when we do rural development and make them set their agenda for what development do they want. That's a very important point for us. Nutrition security, part of the mandate, we work a lot on that. Gender equality, risk mitigation through diversity for resilient livelihoods. And then the climate change adaptation. For all these priorities that goes cross-cutting IFAD work, the plant genetic resources, or the access to the plant genetic resources for smallholders is very, very important. So how do we do that in practice? Local seed systems, that's one way, and that's something we work quite a lot on with our government and other partners. And it's also been spoken on quite a lot today. These systems are informal, but it's already been mentioned by other partners, the local seed banks, and building the capacity for seed multiplication, quality, how do you save the seeds, quality saving, so the local seed systems get strengthened. The other way to work on small farmers' access to plant genetic resources is the participatory variety selection and research. And we try to support that mainly through our grant program, but we also, when the governments are following suit, we try to build it into our loans. So this is kind of the framework around what we are doing on plant genetic resources. Next. Okay, so the title disappeared there. Just, this is one of our grant projects that specifically targeted the neglected and underutilized crops. And it's similar also to the work that Oxfam's told about. So it was a grant giving to Biodiversity International. The only difference from the program Oxfam presented is that this one works specifically on the neglected and underutilized crops and what are threatening those, and why do we not want to lose them. From, first of all, the farmers, the indigenous people's point of view, most of these crops are with the indigenous people, and these are the people who are using them still and feeding them back into the broader farming system sometimes. They're very important for adaptation to climate change, and they have very important characteristics for nutrition. So the policy part of that work went into the nutrition policies of the countries. Why do we not want to lose these varieties from a nutrition point of view, and how can they play a very active role in improving nutrition among the rural poor communities. So the policy work went to there and had quite some success in some of the participating countries. So another example, and this is actually from one of our loan projects. This is a project in the northeast India, and it works with tribal people, 21 different tribal people or tribes. So also 21 different knowledge systems and way of governing their natural resources, which has been quite interesting. And most of the time when we work with partners, which are the farmers, the government, in this case the state government, we learn just as much as I think the farmers can get from our support. What happened in these mountain areas, these are mountain areas and these are forest mountain areas, is that the forest was quite a lot under threat because of increase in population, but also because of unregulated use of extraction of the forest resources, and then the selling of communal forest land to farmers doing monoculture. So part of the work, this is a loan, so it's a 20 million investment running in 2 phases. The second phase was 20 million. I don't have the figure for the first phase. But part of the work was to look at the agrobiodiversity. So what can be revived? So you can see the women, the lady there having a huge cabbage. That was one of the varieties that was found in some of the communities and then again spread out to the rest of communities. And one of the reasons that the farmers like to use this one is that it has these multiple benefits for feed for the livestock. And that's often what we see. The crops that have multiple benefits, these are the ones that are interesting for small farmers because it strengthens their diversity strategies in sustaining their livelihoods. The other part of the work was these seed markets, festivals around what they're specialized in, and they have so beautiful variety of chilies in this case. And working in that way around, and the farmers themselves are setting the agenda. Slowly their community organizations, their governance system got new life and got strengthened. So in the next slide, you will see the other thing the project works on is they do this shifting farming. So because of the population increase and the other pressures of the forest areas, the cycle of their shift had become so short, so the forest couldn't recover every time. So sitting down with the tribal communities themselves and looking at that system, is there a way to optimize it? Not forbid it, but optimize it, because it's a very fundamental part of their culture. So what we figure out in the collaboration with the farmers and the extension workers was that if you do 2 cycles instead of 1, when you do the shifting farming, you can again get a longer period between each shift. So there you can see in the photos on the left side, that's a first-year crop. You have rice, then cultivated, integrated with maize, and also some millets. So this is again, in their thinking, they were thinking diversity in the field. So this is basically something that they already had. But then in the second cycle, instead of just moving on to a new forest area, you can actually cultivate one more time, and what they have there is the ginger intercrop with beans. And the ginger was an important part of this project because that's their cash crop. It increased their income. So the reduction in they call it JUM, the shifting farming, the JUM areas, their farms, was actually 40 to 45%. So it's quite significant. If you work with them on how can you optimize the system, you can get really far down. Wildlife turned back, stream flows and rivers came back, and that in itself was very important for the tribal people, because that's their biodiversity. So the next is, that's also an example from one of our grant projects, but it's quite a remarkable example. It's from Iran, where the Senesta is an NGO. It's called the Center for Sustainable Development. They were leading this grant project where They work together with IFAD and DASI and also IRI in putting together a package of like 1,000 to 1,500 varieties of barley, wheat, and rice. And then you give that package out. It's a totally other way of thinking. Breeding that in the conventional system, even though it's a very old system to do it this way, you give this package back to farmers because they live in these very marginalized systems where climate change is also kicking in, and it's really difficult to do farming. And then you make the nature work together with you in your breeding, and that's actually what farmers have been doing for thousands of years. But you do it now in a systematic way, and we had the researchers in the centers helping putting these packages together. So you get a very interesting mix of plant genetic resources. You get a huge amount of genetic resources back into farmers' fields in one go. And the interesting thing was that already in the first year, these new mixed varieties turned out to be pretty good yielding. And when the droughts started to kick in, which comes once in a while, they were a lot better yielding. Like the local varieties that was left, and also the high yielding or the hybrid yielding varieties. So very significant results on doing breeding that way. So it's called evolutionary participatory plant breeding. And so what the knowledge coming out of this project is that it can work very well in marginalized environments. And it's a way to give farmers totally ownership of their future in terms of participating in breeding, but with the support and backup from the scientists, and in this case, from the multilateral system of seeds, because if we didn't have that system, we couldn't have put these packages together. So I think it nicely demonstrates how all these pieces can fit together in giving farmers more access to plant genetic resources and also to share it. This is just to show one of the very, at the edge of these communities where they actually managed to cultivate barley in this case. So quite remarkable. And to end, challenges that we see, yes, we also see that there's a weak national implementation of the access and benefit sharing and farmers' rights. We are not there. There's a lot of work to be done, but we more work from below. Local seed systems, that is part of a lot of our loan projects. And these heterogeneous population seeds that I just talked about from Iran, they do not fit into most of the seed laws in most of the countries and the certification systems. This has already been touched upon, and they can't stand the tests that comes under the UNFAO for the VCU and the US, which is these, if I remember correctly, the value for cultivation and use. So you have to show conformity, which is very useful if you have commercial seeds that you pay a high price for, that you really know that they also produce. And then you have the other one, which is distinctiveness, uniformity, and stability. Of course, doing plant breeding more based on diversity as such won't fit into these systems. It's simply two different worlds. You can't put them together in the same system. So these are the challenges. However, I think our work and also the work told by other colleagues here today shows that access and benefit sharing, it works at a local level. But it's not this kind of access and benefit sharing where there's the monetary compensation of farmers. But if you support farmers in their own systems, you get the benefits in with feeding back in genetic resources from the gene banks and also the research systems. You work together, then it can actually spread out, and there's a huge benefit sharing from the farmers' communities themselves. So there are things that works, and it's also possible to do the work on the local seed systems, even though the legal framework might not, as such, accept these systems. Very few countries will try to actually get rid of them because they do know how important they are for food security. So this is a good thing. But how do we bring it to more scale? The most difficult part is maybe the vertical upscaling throughout the systems, solving exactly that issue of how do we make legal policy frameworks that have this integrated view of a seed sector. We need both the conventional formal we have today, but we also need the other one. How do we make a framework that can capture both so they can benefit each other? And the other thing is the shift a little bit, not away from, but at least also have some priorities, a bit more focused at what is the research need of smallholder farmers, because they are not necessarily the same. Linking back to because the way they use diversity is so much more different because of their resilience strategies that we should not interfere with. And then there is the, so we can work on those two sides. I think for the vertical, for the horizontal scaling out, I think it's about doing more of what has been told today. And us as a financial institution, we are definitely working on it also because our country partners and definitely the farmers are asking for it. So that comes, but of course there's a lot to be done. Then one more challenge, support smallholders' participation in food system through strengthening their farmers' organization. This is kind of the bread and butter of what we're doing. We need to make sure the smallholders are linked into our food systems as they change. And that can sometimes be a challenge. A lot what we do in IFAD is work on value chains, like so many other finance institutions and governments. When you work on value chains, there's this tendency that you get your work into a focus on one cash crop that can get these people some income, and of course the end goal is to lift people out of poverty. But if you haven't taken into account that the smallholders live based on diversity, they bounce back into poverty. That's what we can see if the cash crop fails.
Dr. Olivera, thank you very much.
Sorry.
I can sense your passion and enthusiasm. If you would just like to make one concluding remark, and then I feel that we must let Sonia Churgo from the European Seeds Association.
No, that was the last slide. Thank you.